The first time I understood that my family had already decided who mattered, I was standing in the kitchen holding a bowl of cranberry sauce that no one had asked me to make. It was Christmas Eve. Snow pressed softly against the windows of my parents' house in Maple Ridge, Connecticut, the kind of picture-perfect town people move to when they want to believe their life makes sense. The house smelled like cinnamon pine and roast turkey. Everything looked warm. Everything looked right. It wasn't. I heard my mother laugh from the dining room, that high-practiced laugh she saved for guests and important moments. My father's voice followed, confident and loud, the voice he used when he wanted to be heard without question. And then my younger sister's voice cut through them both, bright and effortless, like she had always known she belonged exactly where she stood. I carried the bowl into the dining room and stopped short. There were 6 chairs at the table, 6 place settings, 6 folded napkins, 6 name cards written in my mother's careful script. My name wasn't on any of them. For a moment, I genuinely thought it was a mistake. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe they planned to add another chair later. Maybe my mother had simply forgotten the way she sometimes forgot small things about me. My birthday, my favorite color, the fact that I hated nutmeg. But then I saw it, the empty space at the end of the table. No chair, no plate, nothing. My father noticed me standing there. He glanced at the bowl in my hands, then at the table, and his expression barely changed. "Oh," he said casually, "you can eat in the kitchen. We're a bit tight on space tonight." Tight on space. The words landed quietly, but they carried years of meaning. My sister Lauren didn't look up from her phone. My mother avoided my eyes as she adjusted a centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. No one argued, no one corrected him. No one was surprised. I set the bowl down slowly, my hands trembling just enough that I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. In the kitchen, I asked, my voice softer than I intended. My father shrugged. "You don't mind, do you? This dinner is important. We have guests." Guests? On Christmas Eve. People I had grown up seeing every holiday. People who had watched me graduate. Who had hugged me as a child and called me sweet and quiet and thoughtful. I looked at my mother. She finally met my gaze, her eyes full of something that looked like apology and something else that looked like relief. "It's just for tonight," she said. "You understand, honey." I nodded. That was my mistake. I had spent my entire life nodding. I ate alone at the kitchen counter while laughter floated in from the dining room. I could hear forks clinking, glasses being refilled, my father telling one of his stories about the company, the one he started before I was born and always planned to leave to Lauren. I could hear my sister's laughter rising above the rest, confident and careless, as if she had never once wondered whether she belonged. I chewed slowly, my appetite gone, my chest tight. This wasn't the first time I'd been pushed aside. It was just the first time they hadn't bothered to hide it. Growing up, I had been the quiet daughter, the practical one. The one who did well in school, followed rules, stayed out of trouble. Lauren was the spark, the performer, the one my parents talked about when people asked about their children. "She's special," my father liked to say. I learned early that being reliable earned approval but never attention. When Lauren forgot to call, they worried. When I forgot, they scolded. When Lauren failed, they protected her. When I succeeded, they expected it. By the time I was 32, I had built a life that looked respectable from the outside. A stable job as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm. A modest apartment, no scandals, no drama. And yet there I was, eating Christmas dinner alone like an afterthought. After the guests left and the house settled into its late-night quiet, my mother came into the kitchen. She picked up my empty plate, avoiding my eyes. "You shouldn't take it personally," she said. That was when something inside me shifted. "Why not?" I asked. She paused, her hand tightening around the plate. "Because this isn't about you." I laughed softly, a sound that surprised us both. "It never is," I said. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something honest, something real. Instead, she said, "Lauren needs us right now." Lauren was 30. Lauren lived on her own. Lauren had just been promoted at my father's company and was already being positioned as his successor. Lauren needed them. I stood up. "I need air," I said. Outside, the cold hit my face like truth. I stood on the porch watching snow fall onto a driveway my father had paid to have heated so it never iced over. Everything about that house had been designed for comfort and control. I realized then that the empty chair wasn't an oversight. It was a message, and I had finally received it. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I went home, kicked off my boots, and sat in the dark of my apartment until morning. That was the night I stopped trying to earn my place at their table. I didn't know it yet, but that empty seat would become the reason everything in their carefully balanced world would eventually fall apart. And when it did, they would finally notice me. Not as the quiet daughter, but as the one who remembered everything. After Christmas, the silence from my parents stretched on like it always did when I disappointed them by existing outside their convenience. No apology, no follow-up call, no message asking if I had gotten home safely in the snowstorm that night. Instead, 3 days later, my mother sent a group text reminding everyone about Lauren's engagement party. Lauren was getting married. I stared at the screen, rereading the message, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less sharp. Engaged. Party. This Saturday. Their house. My phone buzzed again, a separate message from my sister. "Can you come early? Mom could use help setting up." I almost laughed. She hadn't noticed the empty chair. Or if she had, she'd filed it away as irrelevant. Lauren lived in a world where space was always made for her. Chairs appeared, plates multiplied, people adjusted. I typed back, "Sure." That answer came from muscle memory, not intention. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the kind of winter day that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was already buzzing. Cars lined the street. Voices spilled from the open front door. Inside, my mother was directing traffic with a clipboard, her version of calm efficiency. She smiled when she saw me, that familiar tight smile that never reached her eyes. "You're here," she said, as if I might not have been. "Good. Can you handle the coats?" "Of course." I took jackets, scarves, gloves. I hung them carefully, smoothing sleeves, tucking stray hats into pockets. I had always been good at invisible work. Lauren swept in moments later, glowing, her ring catching the light like it wanted attention. Guests crowded around her, gasping, congratulating, touching her arm, as if she were something delicate and rare. She caught my eye briefly and mouthed, "Thank you." For what, I wasn't sure. My father clinked a glass and made a speech. He talked about legacy, about family, about how proud he was that Lauren had found someone worthy. People laughed at the right places. Someone wiped a tear. I stood near the back of the room, holding a tray of drinks. No one asked me to refill. When the applause died down, my father looked around. "And of course," he added, "this wedding will be a major milestone for all of us. The next chapter." The next chapter. I knew what he meant. Lauren would take over the company after the wedding. It had been hinted at for years, but now it was official, just not publicly announced. I had seen the emails by accident once when I still worked as an external consultant for one of my father's subsidiaries. Succession planning. Leadership grooming. Lauren's name everywhere. Mine nowhere. After the speeches, my aunt pulled me aside. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "are you all right? You seem quiet." I smiled politely. "I'm fine." She lowered her voice. "Your father means well, you know. He just has a lot riding on Lauren." I nodded. That phrase again. A lot riding on Lauren. As if I were weightless. Later, as the party wound down, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "You disappeared after Christmas," she said, her tone almost accusatory. "I went home," I replied. She frowned. "You could have stayed. We would have made room." I met her gaze. "You didn't." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "That wasn't intentional." "It never is," I said quietly. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're too sensitive. You always have been." That word landed harder than anything else she could have said. Sensitive. The family's favorite explanation for my exclusion. Before I could respond, Lauren burst in, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom," she said, "did you tell her yet?" "Tell me what?" My mother hesitated, then forced a smile. "Oh," she said, "right. Lauren and Mark set a date." Lauren beamed. "Christmas weekend next year." The room tilted. "You're getting married on Christmas?" I asked. "Yes," she said brightly. "It's perfect, right? Everyone will already be in town." Everyone. I thought about the empty chair again. "That's convenient," I said. Lauren laughed. "I know Dad loves it." Of course he did. My mother touched my arm. "We'll need all the help we can get." Help. Not a role, not a seat. Help. I drove home that night with my hands clenched on the steering wheel, my chest buzzing with something sharp and unfamiliar. It wasn't sadness. I'd lived with that too long for it to feel new. It was clarity. They weren't cruel. They were consistent. Lauren wasn't favored because she was better. She was favored because she reflected who they wanted to be. I was the reminder of what they ignored. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine I didn't want and sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. Subject line estate planning update. It was from my grandmother's attorney. I froze. My grandmother had died the previous spring. Quietly. Without ceremony. The funeral had been small, almost perfunctory, because my father said it was simpler that way. I had loved her. She had been the only one who ever noticed when I left a room. I opened the email. Dear Ms. Hale, as per your grandmother's instructions, there has been a delay in the execution of certain provisions of her will. Given recent changes in family circumstances, we need to schedule a meeting. My heart began to pound. Recent changes. Wedding engagement or something else. I read the message again, slower this time. There was something about the wording, careful, legal, deliberate. My grandmother had never been careless with words. I thought of her voice, low and steady, the way she used to say, "Pay attention, darling." People tell you who they are when they think you're not listening. I replied immediately. When are you available? The response came minutes later. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because for the first time in my life, I suspected the story my family had been telling might not be the only one that mattered. And if that was true, then the empty chair at Christmas hadn't been the end of something. It had been the beginning. The law office sat on a quiet street lined with bare trees and brick buildings that looked older than the arguments they contained. I arrived early, parked too far down the block, and walked the rest of the way, just to give my body something to do with the energy humming under my skin. I hadn't told my parents about the meeting. I hadn't told Lauren. For once I wanted something that belonged only to me. Inside the office smelled like paper and lemon polish. A receptionist smiled politely and asked me to wait. I sat in a leather chair that creaked when I shifted my hands folded in my lap the way my grandmother had taught me when I was a child. Stillness makes people underestimate you, she used to say. Let them. The attorney, Mr. Caldwell, appeared moments later. He was tall, gray-haired, and moved with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades watching families tear themselves apart over money. Ms. Hale, he said, offering his hand. Thank you for coming. He led me into a small conference room and gestured for me to sit. A thick folder lay on the table between us. I'm sorry for your loss, he began. I nodded, thank you. He opened the folder carefully as if the contents were fragile. Your grandmother was very specific, he said. She anticipated resistance. That word caught my attention. Resistance to what I asked. He looked at me for a moment, measuring something unseen. Then he slid a document across the table. This is an addendum to her will, he said. It was drafted several years ago, updated shortly before her passing, and deliberately withheld until certain conditions were met. My fingers hovered over the paper. What conditions? I asked. He leaned back slightly. Your grandmother believed that favoritism within families often hides deeper ethical failures. She instructed me not to execute this portion of the will until evidence of such favoritism became undeniable. My throat tightened. Undeniable how? In her words, he said, flipping to a handwritten note, when exclusion becomes policy, not accident. The room felt suddenly too small. He continued. She followed your family closely. The business. The dynamic between your parents and their children. She left instructions that if one child were publicly elevated at the expense of another, particularly in matters of legacy succession or inheritance, this addendum would activate. I thought of the engagement party, the speeches, the empty chair, Lauren's wedding, my father's company. My name erased from both. I swallowed. What does the addendum say? Mr. Caldwell slid another document toward me. In short, he said, it restructures the distribution of her estate. And more importantly, it places conditions on assets tied to the family business. I scanned the page, my breath shallow. My grandmother hadn't left everything to my father. She had left controlling interest in several key trusts to me. Not outright ownership. Oversight. The words blurred for a moment. Why, I asked, my voice barely steady. Mr. Caldwell's expression softened. Because she trusted you. I laughed once sharply. No one else ever has. She did, he said simply, and she was very clear about her reasoning. He pulled out one final sheet, a letter. In my grandmother's handwriting. Darling, if you're reading this, then the thing I feared has finally happened. They chose comfort over fairness. They chose the loud child over the honest one. And they forgot that silence is not the same as weakness. You were always watching. That is why this is yours. I pressed my fingers to my mouth. She believed, Mr. Caldwell continued gently, that you would not use this power recklessly, that you would not seek revenge but correction. I looked up at him. What if I want both? He didn't smile. That's not my place to judge. He explained the structure: the trust-controlled key voting rights, funding approvals, succession benchmarks. Any major transition of leadership within my father's company would require compliance with the trust's ethical guidelines. Guidelines my grandmother had written herself. Guidelines that included transparency, non-discrimination, and the equal treatment of heirs. Lauren's planned ascension was no longer automatic. It was conditional. I sat back, my mind racing. They thought the story was already written. They thought Christmas next year would be a coronation. They hadn't read the fine print. What happens if they challenge this? I asked. They will, he said calmly. But your grandmother was meticulous, the language is airtight. And my parents, I asked. They won't be able to remove you without exposing the very behavior your grandmother anticipated. The room went quiet. I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not triumph. Possibility. I left the office an hour later with copies of documents and a weight I had never carried before. Power is heavier when you understand its cost. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight hit the sidewalk sharp and honest. My phone buzzed. Lauren, did you talk to Dad yet? He's in a mood. I stared at the message, then typed back. Not yet. I didn't owe them anything. Not explanations, not warnings. That afternoon, I went to work as usual. I answered emails, ran reports, sat through meetings where people talked over me without noticing. But something had changed. I was no longer invisible. I was undercover. That evening, my father called. His voice was brisk. We need to talk. About what I asked. The company, he said. And your future. I smiled to myself. My future, I repeated. Yes, he said. It's time we discussed where you fit. I thought of my grandmother's letter, of the trust, of the chair they never set. I agree, I said. It's time. We scheduled dinner for the following night. When I hung up, my hands were steady. They thought this conversation would be about boundaries, or forgiveness, or me accepting my place. They had no idea they were already sitting at a table my grandmother had reset years ago. And this time there would be no empty chair, only consequences. My parents' dining room had always been designed to intimidate. High ceilings, heavy wood furniture, portraits of people who looked stern enough to disapprove of you even after death. I had eaten at that table 100 times, always careful with my posture, my tone, my appetite. This time I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Not to make a point, to see what would happen when I didn't rush to accommodate them. My father was already seated at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was preparing for negotiation, not a family meal. My mother hovered near the sideboard, fussing with glasses that were already aligned. Lauren wasn't there yet. That told me everything. Traffic, I said lightly, taking a seat without waiting to be directed. My father glanced at his watch. We agreed on a time. We agreed to talk, I replied. We didn't agree on urgency. My mother flinched. My father studied me, something cautious flickering behind his eyes. You sound defensive. No, I said. I sound informed. Lauren swept in moments later, apologizing breathlessly, ring flashing, confidence intact. She kissed my parents' cheeks and dropped into her chair, the one that had always been hers, the one at the center. Dinner was served. We ate in near silence for the first few minutes, the clink of silverware louder than usual. My father cleared his throat. I'll get straight to it, he said. Lauren will be stepping into a larger role at the company after the wedding. We are aligning leadership now to make the transition smooth. I nodded. That's ambitious. Lauren smiled. Dad thinks I'm ready. I'm sure he does, I said. My mother shot me a warning look. We're trying to have a productive conversation. So am I replied. My father leaned back. You've been distant lately. I've been observant, I said. Lauren laughed softly. You always do this. You get quiet and then suddenly you're upset about something no one knew was a problem. I set my fork down. I wasn't aware I needed permission to notice patterns, I said. Her smile tightened. See, this is what I mean. My father raised a hand. Enough. This isn't about feelings. It's about structure. We want you involved, of course, but in a capacity that suits your strengths. There it was. I waited. Analysis, he continued. Oversight. You're good with details. Lauren is better with people. I thought of the trust, of the conditions, of my grandmother's handwriting. What exactly does involvement look like? I asked. My father slid a folder across the table. A consulting agreement. Limited authority. Clear reporting lines. I opened it. The document was clean, precise, and utterly hollow. No voting power, no decision-making authority, no seat at the table that mattered. They wanted my compliance, not my presence. I closed the folder. I can't agree to this, I said calmly. The air shifted. My father's jaw tightened. This is generous. It's convenient, I replied. Lauren frowned. Why are you being difficult? I looked at her, really looked at her. Because I finally understand the cost, I said. My mother spoke softly. The cost of what? Silence, I said. Of pretending exclusion is kindness. My father stood. You're being emotional. I smiled. No, I'm being specific. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table. Not the full addendum. Just enough. My father scanned it, his expression changing from irritation to confusion to something sharper. What is this? He asked. An oversight condition, I said, tied to Grandma's estate. My mother froze. Her estate was settled. Not entirely, I replied. Lauren leaned forward. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the trust, I said. The one that governs voting rights in certain subsidiaries. The one that activates when succession decisions show evidence of favoritism. My father's face went pale. This is nonsense, he said. Your grandmother wouldn't. She did, I said, and she was very clear. I watched them process it in real time. My mother's hands trembled. Lauren's confidence flickered just briefly. My father recovered first. You're bluffing. I'm not, I said. And you know it. Silence stretched. What do you want? Lauren asked finally. I turned to her. I want transparency, equal standards, and a real role or none at all. My father slammed his hand on the table. You're trying to undermine us. No, I said evenly. I'm enforcing conditions that already exist. My mother's voice broke. Why are you doing this now? I met her gaze. Because you taught me patience, and Grandma taught me timing. Lauren stood abruptly. This is blackmail. It's governance, I replied. There's a difference. My father exhaled sharply. We'll have our lawyers look at this. You should, I said. Mine already has. I gathered my bag and stood. Dinner's getting cold, my mother whispered. I paused. So did I said, for years. Then I left. Outside, the night air was crisp grounding. My hands shook only after I reached my car. Not from fear, from release. They would fight this, I knew that. They would deny, deflect, accuse. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about whether I belonged. It was about whether they could afford to keep pretending I didn't. And that realization would haunt them far longer than any argument ever could. The morning after that dinner, my father's attorney called. Not him, not my mother, not Lauren. An attorney. That told me everything I needed to know. His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of tone designed to sound reasonable while asking for surrender. Ms. Hale, he said, we'd like to clarify some misunderstandings regarding your grandmother's estate. Of course, I replied. I've already clarified them. A pause, papers shifting. The Collins family has concerns about the interpretation of certain clauses, he continued. We believe there may be room for compromise. Compromise. Another word my family loved when they meant control. I'm not interested in compromise, I said. I'm interested in compliance. Silence. That's an unusual stance, he said carefully. It's an accurate one, I replied. We scheduled a formal meeting. Lawyers present. Documents exchanged. Smiles sharp enough to cut glass. Within 48 hours, I knew they were preparing to bury me. Not loudly, not publicly. Quietly. I was suddenly excluded from internal emails I'd previously been copied on. A project I'd advised on for months moved forward without my input. At my own firm, I noticed subtle shifts. Delayed responses. Meetings rescheduled at the last minute. My father had made a call. He didn't need to say my name. His reputation did the work for him. That was when I understood the rules of the game they'd been playing all along. Favoritism was just the surface. Control was the point. I spent the next week doing something they never expected. Nothing. I showed up to work. I smiled. I delivered everything I was contractually obligated to deliver. No more, no less. And in the quiet hours I prepared, I met with Mr. Caldwell again. Then with a forensic accountant my grandmother had quietly retained years ago just in case. Then with an employment attorney who specialized in corporate retaliation cases. Patterns emerged quickly. My father's company had always operated on loyalty instead of policy. Exceptions made for the right people, rules bent for convenience. Promotions justified with vague language like culture fit and leadership presence. Lauren's rise had left fingerprints everywhere. None of it illegal. Not yet. But fragile. Very fragile. At the same time, invitations stopped coming. No calls from my mother. No texts from Lauren asking for help. At first, the silence stung. Then it clarified. They were closing ranks. And that meant they were afraid. One evening, I ran into an old colleague from one of my father's subsidiaries at a coffee shop near my apartment. We exchanged pleasantries, careful and polite, until he leaned in. They're talking about you, he said quietly. Who? I asked. Your father's circle, he replied. They think you're unstable, that you're acting out because you're jealous of your sister. I smiled. Of course they do. They're telling people you don't understand the business, he continued. That your grandmother was manipulated. That made me laugh. My grandmother had been many things. Manipulable wasn't one of them. Thank you for telling me, I said. He hesitated. Be careful. They're setting a narrative. I walked home that night under a sky heavy with clouds, my thoughts sharper than they'd ever been. They wanted a story. Fine, I would give them one. Just not the one they planned. The first crack came from an unexpected place: human resources. A mid-level manager at one of the subsidiaries reached out anonymously through a compliance channel I had oversight access to thanks to the trust. Her message was short. I've been asked to alter performance records to justify a leadership change. I'm uncomfortable. My pulse quickened. I requested documentation. What she sent was careful, thorough, and damning. Performance metrics adjusted retroactively. Negative feedback added after the fact. All to support Lauren's appointment as interim director of a regional branch. This wasn't favoritism. This was fabrication. I didn't forward it. I didn't confront anyone. I archived it. Then another message arrived. Then another. Different departments, same pattern. I began to see the shape of it. They weren't just elevating Lauren. They were rewriting reality to do it. That weekend, my mother finally called. Her voice was strained. Why are you doing this? Doing what I asked. Making things difficult, she said. Your father is under enormous pressure. I closed my eyes. So am I. You're tearing the family apart, she whispered. No, I replied. I'm refusing to hold it together with my silence. She cried then, softly, genuinely, and for a moment I almost stopped. Almost. But then I remembered the kitchen, the empty chair, the word sensitive, and the tears dried. Tell Dad to follow the rules, I said. This all ends when he does. She hung up without answering. The following Monday, the engagement announcement went public. Press releases, photos, smiling faces. Lauren looked radiant, confident, untouchable. I watched the coverage with a strange calm, because I knew something she didn't. She thought this was a coronation. She had no idea it was a test. And every step she took forward without meeting the conditions my grandmother set brought the entire structure closer to collapse. I didn't need to push. I just needed to let them keep choosing the same thing they always had. Favoritism over fairness, control over truth. Because this time the cost was written down, signed, and waiting. The war hadn't begun with shouting. It had begun with paperwork, and I was finally fluent in that language. Power doesn't usually announce itself with shouting. It hides in calendars, in forwarded emails, in meetings scheduled without you, and decisions made for efficiency. I had lived on the receiving end of that kind of power for most of my life. What my family never expected was that I'd learn how to read it. By the second week of January, the pattern was undeniable. Lauren had been named interim director of a regional division that generated a significant portion of the company's annual revenue. The announcement came quietly buried in an internal memo sent late on a Friday afternoon. No celebration, no explanation, just a line about strategic continuity. Continuity, another word they used when they meant control. Under the trust, any leadership appointment at that level triggered a mandatory review. Ethics. Performance. Conflict of interest. It wasn't optional. My grandmother had made sure of that. The review hadn't happened. Instead, documents had been altered to suggest it already had. I sat at my dining table that night, laptop open, folders spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Each file alone looked harmless. Together, they told a story no one wanted written. Performance evaluations dated after decisions had been made. Emails referencing meetings that never occurred. Signatures that matched handwriting but not timelines. It wasn't dramatic. It was careless. They had never needed to be careful before. I forwarded everything to my attorney with a single sentence. This is no longer about favoritism. This is misrepresentation. The response came within minutes. We need to move slowly and precisely. I slept for 3 hours that night. Not from fear, from focus. The next morning, I requested a formal compliance audit under my authority as trust overseer. The language was neutral, professional, impossible to ignore without leaving a trail. Within hours, my father called. His voice was tight. You didn't need to do this. Yes, I said, I did. You're humiliating us, he snapped. No, I replied. You're panicking. A sharp inhale. This is internal. Family matters. This is corporate governance, I said. Family stopped being relevant when you rewrote records. He lowered his voice. You don't understand what you're risking. I almost laughed. I understand exactly what I'm risking, I said. Do you? He hung up. That afternoon, Lauren showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her engagement ring catching the light like it wanted attention. Are you trying to ruin my life? She demanded. I didn't invite her in. I'm trying to enforce rules, I said. If that feels like an attack, maybe ask why. Her jaw tightened. Dad says you're obsessed, that Grandma poisoned you against us. I smiled faintly. Dad says a lot of things when he's cornered. This was supposed to be my year, she said, her voice cracking. My wedding, my promotion, everything. I studied her face. For the first time, I saw something underneath the confidence. Fear. It still can be, I said calmly, if you're qualified. Her eyes flashed. I am qualified. Then you'll pass the review, I replied, and nothing changes. She hesitated, just for a second. That told me more than any document ever could. You could have talked to me, she said. I did, I replied, for years. You just never listened. She left without another word. The audit process began quietly, too quietly for comfort. Compliance officers requested files, departments scrambled, meetings multiplied. The mood shifted from confident to cautious. People started calling me back. Not warmly, not openly, but carefully. I received an anonymous voicemail late one night. You're not wrong, a man said, but you're dangerous now. He hung up before I could respond. Dangerous. I wore the word like armor. My mother finally came to see me a few days later. She looked smaller than I remembered, her coat buttoned wrong, her hair undone in a way she never allowed. I don't recognize this family anymore, she said, sitting at my kitchen table. I do, I replied. I just stopped pretending it was something else. She rubbed her hands together. Your father built everything we have. And Grandma saw what it cost, I said. She loved him, my mother whispered. She loved fairness more, I replied. Tears slid down her cheeks. You're tearing Lauren apart. I leaned forward. No, I'm asking her to stand on her own. My mother looked at me like she was seeing a stranger, or maybe for the first time a person she hadn't bothered to know. The audit's preliminary findings landed the following week. Language mattered. Irregularities, inconsistencies, procedural failures. No accusations yet, just facts. Enough to freeze further promotions, enough to delay succession planning, enough to make investors nervous. The board requested a special session, without Lauren, without my father, with me. As I walked into that conference room, I realized something that made my chest ache and my spine straighten at the same time. I wasn't there as a daughter. I was there as leverage. They asked me questions about intent, about oversight, about whether this could be resolved internally. It can, I said. If transparency replaces favoritism, one man frowned. That would require significant restructuring. Yes, I agreed, it would. They exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand the scope of the problem. That night, as I stood by my window watching snow fall onto a city that didn't care about my family's legacy, I felt something shift again. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was inevitability. They had built a system that only worked when no one questioned it. My grandmother had given me the questions. All I had done was ask them out loud. And once asked, they could never be unheard. By February, the house of cards began to lean. Not collapse, not yet, but lean enough that everyone could feel it. Lauren's title remained interim, a word that followed her like a shadow. At meetings, people smiled at her but waited for confirmation from someone else before moving forward. Decisions stalled. Emails multiplied. Confidence, once effortless, became something she had to perform. I watched from a distance. That was the hardest part. Doing nothing when every instinct told me to step in, to fix, to smooth over. The old version of me would have done exactly that. Quiet competence, emotional labor, cleanup duty. This time I let the silence do its work. The first real crack came at a regional leadership call I was allowed to observe but not attend. Lauren was presenting growth projections. I recognized the numbers immediately. They were optimistic, aggressively so. Someone challenged her. Not rudely, not dramatically, just a calm question about assumptions. Lauren froze. It was brief, a pause most people wouldn't notice. But I did. I'd seen that pause my entire life. The moment where she realized charm wouldn't carry her through. She recovered, deflected, promised to follow up, but the room had shifted. Later that day, a compliance officer forwarded me a note. Several managers expressed concern about leadership preparedness. Concern, another careful word. That evening, Lauren called. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse. She sounded tired. They're setting me up to fail, she said. No, I replied. They're asking you to lead. Silence. I never wanted it like this, she said finally. Like what I asked. Like I have to prove something, she said. I closed my eyes. That's what I've been doing my entire life, I said. She exhaled sharply. You always make it about you. I didn't respond. I'm under so much pressure, she continued. Dad expects perfection. Mom keeps saying I just need to push through, and now you've got everyone watching. I chose my words carefully. You're not under pressure because of me, I said. You're under pressure because you were never allowed to be unprepared. She hung up. 2 days later, the board requested Lauren's attendance at a follow-up review, this time with documentation. She called me again that night, panic barely contained. I need your help, she said. There it was. The request she had never made before. What kind of help, I asked. You know the systems, the numbers, the policies, she said quickly. You could walk me through it. We could present together, show unity. Unity. The word tasted bitter. You want me to save you, I said. I want us to survive, she replied. I thought about the kitchen, the empty chair, the years of swallowing everything to keep the peace. I can't do that, I said. Her voice sharpened. So you are trying to ruin me? No, I said. I'm refusing to lie for you. You always think you're so righteous, she snapped. Like you're better than us. I stayed quiet. She laughed bitterly. You're enjoying this. That one hurt. No, I said softly. I'm mourning what it didn't have to be. She hung up again. The next morning, my father showed up at my office. Not my apartment, not my phone. My office. He walked in like he owned the place because for most of my life, he had owned every room I stood in. We need to end this, he said without preamble. I agree, I replied. This has gone too far, he continued. Lauren is suffering. Investors are nervous. You've made your point. My point wasn't personal, I said. It was structural. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Name your price. I almost smiled. There is no price, I said. There are conditions. His eyes hardened. You think this makes you powerful? No, I replied. It makes me responsible. He scoffed. You were never meant for leadership. I met his gaze steadily. And yet here I am. The silence between us stretched. You're tearing this family apart, he said again. I shook my head. I'm showing it as it is. He left without another word. That afternoon, the board released a memo. Lauren's interim role would conclude at the end of the quarter, pending further evaluation. Succession planning would be reopened, external candidates included. The golden child had cracked. Not publicly, not dramatically, but undeniably. That night, my mother called sobbing. She's in her room, she said. She won't eat. She keeps saying she's failed. I felt a familiar pull, the urge to go to her, to fix it. I'm sorry, I said gently, but this isn't mine to fix. My mother whispered. What happened to you? I answered honestly. I grew up. When I hung up, my hands shook. Not from doubt, from grief. Because this was the moment I finally understood the truth beneath everything. Lauren had been favored, but she had also been protected. And protection, when it replaces preparation, becomes its own kind of betrayal. The system that erased me had also crippled her. That didn't excuse anything, but it explained everything. As I stood by the window watching lights flicker on across the city, I realized the final twist wasn't that the golden child fell. It was that when she did, there was nothing underneath her. No practice falling. No muscle memory for failure. Just fear. And a sister she had never learned how to stand beside. The question now wasn't whether the system would collapse. It was how much damage it would do on the way down. And whether I would let it take me with it. I already knew the answer. I wouldn't. March arrived with rain that wouldn't commit to being gentle or violent. It soaked everything evenly like the truth does when it finally comes out. By then, the company felt like a building with its lights on and no one inside. Meetings happened. Decisions didn't. People waited for permission that no longer existed. That's when I pulled the lever no one saw. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten. I didn't warn. I listened. The trust didn't just give me oversight. It gave me access. Compliance reports, vendor contracts, internal grievances that had been buried under layers of polite language. When you stop being invisible, people start telling you things they've been holding for years. A facilities manager forwarded a chain of emails about a vendor favored by my father, overpriced, underperforming, renewed automatically every year without review. A longtime supplier who happened to sponsor the same charity dinners my parents loved to attend. A junior accountant flagged a reimbursement pattern that didn't match policy. Nothing dramatic, just consistent enough to matter. A regional HR lead admitted off the record that complaints about a senior executive had been handled informally to avoid disruption during the succession transition. Every story had the same shape. Exceptions made for comfort, rules bent for optics, silence rewarded. I compiled everything into a single clean brief, no adjectives, no conclusions, just facts, timelines, and citations. Then I requested an independent ethics review, not internal, external. That request landed like a dropped plate. My father called within an hour. "You're inviting strangers into private matters," he said. "I'm inviting accountability," I replied. "This will destroy trust," he snapped. "It will test it," I said. "There's a difference." He accused me of betrayal again, of ambition, of wanting to replace him. I let him talk. When he finished, I said one sentence. "You taught me to protect the company. I finally am." He hung up. The review team arrived the following week. They were calm, precise, immune to charm. They asked for documents, for interviews, for explanations that didn't rely on tone or reputation. Lauren tried to cooperate. I'll give her that. She showed up early, prepared binders, rehearsed answers. But preparation isn't the same as understanding. When the questions veered off script, she faltered. When asked why certain policies were waived, she defaulted to, "That's how it's always been done." Always. The most dangerous word in any institution. My mother stopped calling. Friends of the family stopped inviting me to things. People chose sides quietly the way they always do when they think no one's watching. I didn't chase them. I was done auditioning for belonging. The review's interim findings leaked not by me, but by inevitability. Investors don't like uncertainty. They like clarity even when it's uncomfortable. Stock dipped, not dramatically, just enough. The board called an emergency session. This time my father was not invited. Neither was Lauren. When I entered the room, I felt the weight of every year I'd been talked over, dismissed, redirected. I set my bag down and sat without asking where. The chair held. The chair always had. They asked me what I wanted. I answered honestly. I want the company to survive without pretending I said. I want leadership selected by standards that apply to everyone. I want the trust conditions enforced, not negotiated. One man asked, "And your role?" I paused. "I will not take a position I haven't earned," I said. "But I will not lend my silence to protect positions that haven't either." They exchanged looks. The decision wasn't immediate. These things never are. But momentum doesn't need permission. It just needs direction. That night, Lauren showed up again. She didn't knock this time. She leaned against the doorframe like she was afraid I'd shut it in her face. "They're talking about removing Dad," she said. "I know," I replied. "They asked me to step back," she continued. "Completely." I waited. "They said I could reapply in the future," she said, her voice hollow. "After training. External experience. Time." I nodded. "That's fair." She stared at me. "You planned this." "I prepared for this," I corrected. "There's a difference." She laughed once bitter. "You always sound like a lawyer now." "I sound like someone who learned the rules," I said. Her shoulders slumped. "I don't know who I am without this." I softened just a little. Neither did I, for a long time. She sank onto the couch. "They never taught me how to fail." I sat across from her. "They taught me how to disappear." We looked at each other, then really looked. Two products of the same system shaped in opposite ways. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I said. "But fear isn't the enemy. Avoidance is." She wiped her eyes. "What happens now?" I answered truthfully. "Now everyone has to learn something new." She left quietly. The next morning, the board announced an interim CEO. External, experienced, unrelated. My father's name was removed from the letterhead by noon. The family group chat went silent. By evening, the ethics review escalated from interim to full. I stood by my window, rain streaking the glass, and felt something unexpected. Not victory. Relief, because the lever I pulled wasn't revenge. It was gravity. And gravity doesn't care who you are. It only cares whether you've been standing on something solid. They hadn't, and for the first time I wasn't trying to hold them up. I was standing on my own ground. Whatever fell next would fall without my hands on it. And that mattered more than anything else. The day my father was asked to step aside, the house changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. But the air inside it shifted like a building that has lost its purpose and doesn't know it yet. My mother called me that morning. Her voice was thin, stripped of the practiced calm she'd worn my entire life. "They're coming to the house," she said. "The lawyers. The accountants." For what I asked, though, I already knew. "To review records," she replied. "They want access to Dad's files, personal ones." I pictured the study. The locked drawers, the shelves of framed awards and carefully curated photos. Evidence of a life measured in optics. "I won't be there," I said. She paused. "They asked if you would come." I closed my eyes. No. When I hung up, I expected guilt or regret. Instead, I felt distance, clean and quiet. Later that afternoon, I drove past the house anyway. I didn't stop. I just slowed long enough to see unfamiliar cars in the driveway, men and women in dark coats moving with the efficiency of people who don't care about history. The portraits were still hanging in the windows. My father shaking hands with politicians, accepting plaques, smiling into cameras like he believed the frame would last forever. It wouldn't. That evening, Lauren called. "They're taking everything apart," she said. "Dad's furious. He keeps saying this wouldn't be happening if you'd stayed loyal." I leaned against the kitchen counter, the hum of my refrigerator grounding me. "Loyalty to what?" I asked. "To family," she replied automatically. "No," I said, "loyalty to a story." She was quiet for a long moment. "Mom hasn't eaten all day." I sighed. "Has she ever asked why?" Lauren didn't answer. The full ethics review findings were released 2 days later. They weren't explosive. They were devastating. Not because they revealed one great crime, but because they exposed a pattern. Years of small exceptions, informal favors, decisions justified by comfort instead of compliance. The kind of thing powerful families rely on never being examined closely. The board issued a statement committing to reform. Investors stabilized. The company didn't collapse. It adapted. My father, however, did not. He refused interviews, refused to cooperate beyond what was legally required. He told anyone who would listen that he was being punished for tradition, not wrongdoing. The word tradition appeared 3 times in his written response. Not once did he mention accountability. The night before the board voted on permanent restructuring, my mother came to see me. She stood in my doorway like she didn't recognize the place, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes taking in the small details. The plants, the books stacked unevenly, the absence of performance. "This feels real," she said quietly. "It is," I replied. She sat at my table, folding her hands the way she always had when she wanted to be taken seriously. "I don't know who he is anymore," she said. I didn't rush to comfort her. "I don't know who I am without him," she continued. I met her gaze. "Then maybe this is your chance." Her eyes filled. "You sound like your grandmother." I smiled faintly. She would have liked that. We sat in silence for a while. Then she asked the question she'd never asked before. "Did we hurt you?" The words hung between us, fragile and overdue. "Yes," I said simply. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I thought keeping the peace was kindness." "So did I replied. "Until it started costing me myself." She reached across the table, hesitated, then took my hand. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "You don't have to fix it," I said. "You just have to stop denying it." She squeezed my hand once and stood. At the door, she turned back. "They're taking down the portraits," she said. I nodded. That night, the board voted. Permanent restructuring, external leadership, trust conditions enforced in full. My father was officially removed from any operational role. The company would survive. The myth would not. Lauren texted me late. "They took Dad's name off the building." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Names aren't foundations," I wrote. "Values are." She didn't respond. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom again. This time there was no tension, no performance, just work. They offered me a role, not as an heir, not as a symbol, as oversight, as accountability. I accepted with conditions: transparency, independence, no family exceptions. They agreed. As I left the building, I felt the weight of something lift. Not anger, expectation. For the first time, I wasn't being measured against who I was supposed to be. I was being trusted for who I was. That evening, I drove back past my parents' house. The windows were dark. The portrait's gone. Just a structure now, empty of narrative. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, watching a place that had once defined me lose its power. The house wasn't destroyed. It was just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something essential. The hardest part of revenge isn't the confrontation. It's surviving the aftermath without becoming what hurt you. The story wasn't over yet, but the chapter where they controlled the ending was, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like space. Victory doesn't arrive the way movies promise. There's no swell of music, no applause, no moment where the world pauses to acknowledge what you endured to get there. It arrives quietly like a bill slid under the door. I felt it the morning after the board vote. I woke up early, my body tense as if it were bracing for something that never came. No frantic calls, no emergencies, no one demanding explanations or forgiveness. Just silence. At work, people treated me differently, not with warmth, with caution. Conversations lowered when I passed. Smiles measured, respect edged with uncertainty. I had become powerful, and power, I was learning, isolates in ways invisibility never did. The first cost came from an unexpected place: my job. 2 days after accepting the oversight role, my direct supervisor called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, which immediately put me on guard. "This isn't about performance," he said quickly. "You've been exemplary." "Then what is it about?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Perception." "Of course it was. Your name is circulating," he continued. "Some clients are concerned about conflicts of interest, given your family's situation." I waited. "We think it might be best if you take a leave," he finished. "Paid, temporary." Temporary? Another word that meant removal without confrontation. I nodded slowly. "You're asking me to step aside." He exhaled. "Until things settle." Things never settle, I thought. They just get quieter. "I understand," I said. I packed my desk that afternoon. Not dramatically, just efficiently, the same way I'd always done everything. When I got home, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall longer than I care to admit. This was the part no one warns you about. When you stop accepting injustice, it doesn't just punish the people who hurt you. It tests how much you're willing to lose. That night, Lauren called. "I heard," she said. "About the leave?" I asked. "Yes." There was an awkward pause. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "This wasn't supposed to touch your life like that." I closed my eyes. "It always touched my life," I replied. "You're just seeing it now." She sighed. "Dad says you've ruined everything." "What do you think?" I asked. Another pause. "I think," she said slowly, "that I don't know how to live without someone telling me what I'm allowed to be." That was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. The second cost came from my mother. She stopped calling. Not dramatically, not angrily. She simply disappeared. I heard from neighbors that she'd started spending nights at a friend's house, that she avoided the grocery store, that she told people she was tired. I wanted to reach out. I didn't. This wasn't punishment. It was boundaries. The third cost surprised me the most: my certainty. There were moments late at night when doubt crept in like a familiar voice. "You could have handled this more gently. You didn't have to push so hard. You could have stayed quiet and kept your place." I would lie awake replaying the kitchen, the empty chair, my father's casual dismissal. And then I would remember the records altered, the rules bent, the lives impacted beyond our family. Quiet would have been easier. It would also have been dishonest. A week later, the interim CEO invited me to coffee. "No agenda, no paperwork." "I want to be clear," he said. "You're not here to protect the past. You're here to prevent repetition." "Yes," I said. "And that means people won't like you," he continued, "including people you care about." "I know," I replied. He studied me. "Why are you still standing?" I thought about my grandmother, about the note, about the empty chair. "Because disappearing almost destroyed me," I said, "and I won't go back to that." He nodded. "Then you're the right person for this." When I left the cafe, the sky was overcast, heavy with rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. I walked instead of driving, letting the city move around me. For the first time, I noticed how many women my age walked with the same quiet determination, faces that had learned endurance long before recognition. That night, an email arrived from the board. They wanted to expand my role. More authority, more responsibility, more exposure. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the real test. Not whether I could tear something down, but whether I could build without becoming brittle. I replied with my conditions: independence, transparency, term limits. They agreed. As I shut my laptop, I felt something settle inside me. The revenge phase was over. What came next would require something harder than anger. Integrity without applause, strength without spectacle, leadership without inheritance. Outside, rain finally began to fall. I stood by the window and let myself feel the weight of it all. Winning had cost me comfort, proximity, and the illusion of belonging, but it had given me something far rarer, a life that no longer required permission, and that I was learning was worth every price. By the time spring arrived, the world had already decided who I was. Not who I said I was, not who I felt like inside, who I represented. Articles used words like whistleblower, reformer, disruptor. None of them mentioned daughter, or sister, or the quiet girl who used to stand in kitchens holding bowls no one needed. I learned quickly that when you step out of silence, people rush to fill the space with labels. At first I corrected them. Then I stopped. Because the truth was simpler and harder to explain. I hadn't changed. I had just stopped shrinking. The oversight role expanded faster than I expected. Departments that had once avoided me now requested my input. Executives spoke more carefully in meetings. Policies that had been flexible for years were suddenly enforced with enthusiasm. Fear is a powerful motivator. So is exposure. One afternoon, as I reviewed a compliance report, I noticed a familiar name. a senior vice president who had once laughed when I raised concerns in a meeting years earlier. Back then, he'd said, "You worry too much. This is how business works." Now his department was flagged for repeated violations. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt confirmation. People hadn't changed. Only the consequences had. Lauren took a job out of state. She didn't tell anyone at first. I heard it through my mother, who mentioned it in passing like she was talking about the weather. She needed a fresh start, my mother said. So did I thought. Lauren texted me a week later. "I'm starting over. No one knows me here." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "That might be the first honest thing you've ever had." She sent a single heart in response. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't war either. My mother eventually resurfaced. She called one afternoon and asked if we could walk together. Neutral ground, no house, no table heavy with history. We met at a park near the river. She looked older, not weaker, just unprotected. "I keep replaying things," she said as we walked. "Moments I dismissed. Things you tried to say." I listened. "I thought love meant smoothing things over," she continued, "keeping everyone comfortable. Comfort for who I asked gently." She stopped walking. "For your father," she said quietly. "For Lauren, for the image." She looked at me then. "Not for you." I didn't argue. That was the difference now. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this when we packed," she said. "It was in your grandmother's things." Inside was a photograph. Me, at maybe 10 years old, sitting at the dining table alone reading while everyone else talked. My grandmother's hand rested on my shoulder. The back of the photo held a single line in her handwriting. "She sees everything." My throat tightened. "She knew," my mother whispered. "Yes," I said, "she did." We walked the rest of the way in silence. That night, alone in my apartment, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my father, not at Lauren, not even at my mother. Anger had been useful. But it wasn't home. Home, I was learning, was the quiet confidence of knowing I didn't need to prove my pain for it to be real. The next challenge came from the outside. A consulting firm approached me with an offer. A role, high visibility, more money than I'd ever made. They didn't hide the reason. "You have a reputation," the recruiter said. "People listen to you." I asked the question that mattered. Would I be allowed to walk away from clients who don't align with my standards? There was a pause. "We'd have to discuss that," she said carefully. I declined. Power that requires compromise is just control with better branding. Instead, I proposed something radical to the board. A permanent ethics council. Independent, rotating leadership, anonymous reporting with protection written into contracts. They hesitated. This wasn't cosmetic reform. This was structural. "It will slow things down," one member warned. Yes, I agreed. "It will also keep us honest." They voted. It passed. The night the policy was announced, my phone buzzed with messages from people I barely knew. "Thank you. This matters. I wish this existed years ago." One message stood out. From a woman in operations. "I stayed silent for 10 years because I watched what happened to you. Seeing you stand now made me believe I could too." I set the phone down and let the weight of that settle. Revenge would never have done this. Only refusal. Refusal to disappear. Refusal to protect lies. Refusal to carry what wasn't mine. Late that evening, my father emailed. Not a rant, not an accusation. A single line. "You could have had everything." I read it once. Then I replied, "I have everything I need." I didn't wait for a response. I already knew there wouldn't be one. As I turned off the light and lay in the quiet, I thought about the woman I had become. Not louder, not harder, just impossible to put back where I'd been. They couldn't erase me now, not because I fought, but because I stayed. And tomorrow the final chapter would begin, not with confrontation, but with choice. 1 year after the Christmas I ate alone in the kitchen, I hosted dinner. Not at my parents' house, not anywhere tied to history or expectation. In my apartment. The table was small, solid, scarred in places from everyday use. I set it carefully, not perfectly. Plates that didn't match, candles that leaned slightly to one side, food that mattered more for comfort than presentation. There were 3 chairs, every one of them intentional. Lauren arrived first. She looked different than she used to, less polished, more real. She hugged me without asking, a little awkward, a little sincere. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "I know," I said. She smiled faintly. "But I wanted to sit where no one knows who I'm supposed to be." My mother came next. She stood in the doorway for a moment like she was waiting for instructions that never came. "Come in," I said simply. She stepped inside, looking around slowly. The quiet, the lack of pretense. "This feels honest," she said. "It is," I replied. We sat. No one rushed to speak, no one filled the silence out of fear. That alone felt like a victory. Halfway through the meal, my mother set her fork down. "I've been thinking about that Christmas," she said softly. "The one with the empty chair." Lauren stiffened. "I told myself it didn't matter," my mother continued, "that it was practical, temporary." She looked at me. I was wrong. I didn't interrupt. "I thought keeping the peace meant everyone would be fine," she said. "But all it did was decide who mattered." Lauren's voice trembled. "I didn't see it." "I know," I said. "And I didn't stop it," my mother added, "which is worse." I let the silence stretch. "I can't change that," she whispered. "But I want to stop pretending it wasn't harm." I nodded. "That's enough," I said. "Not forgiveness, not absolution. Truth." After dinner, Lauren helped clear the table. She washed dishes while I dried a rhythm we'd never shared before. "I'm starting therapy," she said suddenly. I smiled. "That's brave." She shrugged. "I don't want to be the person who only survives when someone else disappears." That mattered more than any apology. Later, after they left, I sat alone at the table. The candles had burned low. Wax pooled unevenly. The room smelled like food and something calmer than relief. I thought about my father. He didn't call, he didn't write again. And for the first time, I understood that silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's avoidance, sometimes it's punishment, and sometimes it's the end of control. At work, the Ethics Council held its first open forum the following week. Employees spoke, carefully at first, then more freely. Stories emerged, patterns, relief. I listened more than I spoke. That was my role now. Not savior, not avenger. Witness. The consulting offers kept coming. Media invitations, panels, titles I didn't ask for. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in being admired. I was interested in building something that didn't require admiration to function. One afternoon, a young woman stopped me in the lobby after a meeting. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. I spoke up for the first time today. My chest tightened. "How did it feel?" I asked. "Terrifying," she admitted, "but I wasn't erased." I smiled. "Good," I said. "You shouldn't be." That night, I opened my grandmother's letter again. The one she'd written years before any of this happened. She had known. She had seen what I was becoming long before I did. And she had trusted me not to burn the house down, but to refuse to live in it as it was. Revenge hadn't been the point. Reclamation had. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped sacrificing myself to preserve a lie. That distinction mattered. As I turned out the light and prepared for sleep, I felt something settle fully for the first time. Not closure. Freedom. If you're listening to this story and you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or told to wait quietly while others were chosen over you, hear this. You don't need to fight louder. You don't need to beg for a chair. You don't need to burn the table down. You can build your own. And when you do, make sure every seat is earned by honesty, not fear. If this story resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from. Share it with someone who's been made invisible. And stay with me. Because this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was about dignity. And dignity, once reclaimed, changes everything.